So first things first, client-server architecture. The thing with this setup is it has been sort of the architecture that we have been using since web came about, and even before that. The idea is that this is just as simple as it gets. You have your client, which is on the left side, and you have your server, which is on the right side. Whenever we are using this architecture, we always get the information, and most of the information is being processed and saved in the server side, and it is usually visualized and interact using the client side. So that is the main thing about the client server architecture. There are many different architectures out there, so I'll be putting out a video series about different architectures without much code, so it's more of like introduction of all those things. But this is one of the things that we will be doing for this video series. We will also discuss how what is API design. So the thing with backend setup, so there is always a standard for creating API or application programming interface where it allows developers to be able to have a predictable way to access your server. So in this case, even if I would be the one also accessing the server, because I would be the one developing the front end part, it's better to have a set of standards that most, if not all, of developers understand and can sort of wrap their heads around it in a predictable way. So the thing with API design that we will be discussing here are these things: resources, resource identifiers, and resource hierarchy. So whenever we create a particular system, we always think about the resources that we are using. So for this setup, we will be using to-do. So if you are going to create a to-do list, we have this resource called a to-do. Or if you have like a user management system, you have a user. Or if you have like a library, you have your books. And then you'll also have resource identifiers, which is, let's say, an identification, a unique identification to a particular to-do, or a unique identification or username for a user ID. And then lastly is the hierarchy. So if you have like a book to be a part of a, let's say, a library section, you want to be able to access the library first before going to the book. So those are the things that you want to do. In terms of the URL that you will be designing, it becomes predictable because it becomes this way. So now a to-do would be the first sort of directory in terms of the URL. So let's say sample.com/todo or sample.com/user for all the users. For identifiers, you just add like the unique identifier after that keyword. And for the resource hierarchy, you have your section, which identifies that this is about a section, and then that identifier, which is, let's say, section-01. And then you have book, which is the collection of books, and then the unique identifier. So these are the main guidelines that we will be using when it comes to designing the URL for an API. We may deviate from this later on when we are designing for an action, let's say for login and logout, but in this case, this is something that we will be using for data elements that we will be processing or accessing in our server. The next is, of course, the methods. Now, HTTP methods are already in sort of a standard in web development, and there are 4 methods that we will be using, and these are the examples. So if you are going to access many objects of a particular object that you have set, you have your sample.com/todo. So you just use the method get. We will show you, or I will show you how to do that. The next is, if you want to only reference or get one of that object, then you add the unique identifier after that, the model name or the data name. If you want to create a to-do because you don't know the unique identifier yet, you use the model name or the data name without the unique identifier at the end and use post. This allows us to send the data without putting it on the URL. So it's part of the body of the or the payload of that request that we are sending, which I will show later. The next is, if you want to update, put is the method to identify that we are updating this object. And lastly is delete, where if we do this, it eventually deletes the data on the system. So that is the guidelines that we will be using for this series, and we'll go to the next part.